And that's something that probably doesn't get enough attention. First of all, I really have to give some shout outs to a lot of the folks that have been involved in this. None of this happens in a vacuum, and you guys can see all the scientists that have been involved in, developing the ECI, developing and testing the mod, which I'm going to be talking about later, and of course a lot of research staff and app developers. Before I get started, I just want to show you guys a quick little scholarly video to kind of set the stage here.
I'm sorry, we have no mid-sets available at the moment.
I don't understand. I'm at a reservation. Do you have my reservation?
Yes, we do. Unfortunately, we ran out of cars.
But the reservation keeps the car here. That's why you have the reservation.
I know why we have reservations.
I don't think you do. If you did, I'd have a car. So you know how to take the reservation, you just don't know how to hold the reservation. And that's really the most important part of the reservation, the hold. Anybody can just take it.
So what does that have to do with data? Well, I think we can all kind of agree that we are really good at taking data and collecting data, putting data into storage systems and data systems and reporting on things. What we're not really good at is actually making decisions based on that data for individual children. And that is not at all the fault of teachers, educators, practitioners. That's us as scientists, as assessment developers, and not making it really that clear what to do with the data that we get. You guys have heard of Google, I'm sure, and Google has done an excellent job of making it really easy to use traffic and navigation data to help us make really quick decisions in the moment about how to get from point A to point B. And so that's kind of, obviously we're not Google, we don't have quite as much data as they have, but that's kind of the kind of foundation of this, is that we really want to be able to help, going beyond just providing professional development. And pre-service education's great, but really being able to take a data point and guide a practitioner who probably has very little background in how to use data to identify what type of a strategy is going to help this child make improvement. And if they're not making improvement, how do we, what kind of a change needs to be made to guide that child so that they are making some type of improvement. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to be talking about, speculating why data-driven decision-making is such a rare phenomenon, particularly in early childhood education. And the role of general outcome measures, that's the type of measure that I'm going to be talking about. The early communication indicator is a general outcome measure. And the web application we've developed to do just that, be sort of that coach, that personal assistant as the data are being entered into the data system and helping that practitioner make some decisions. So first of all, educators, as we know, lack a lot of confidence and training in how to use data to make actionable decisions, not just at a global level, like at the school level, the program level, or the district level. We're talking about individual children. That's certainly not to say that that's the case across the board. BCBAs, I think, are particularly well versed at using data, but they go through a lot of training and they're constantly collecting data and graphing it And they have a lot of training on how to do that and how that should guide their intervention programs. Probably one of the biggest drawbacks with early childhood education, particularly infant and toddlers, is there's really limited measures that are specifically designed to make those individual child intervention decisions. Also, it's really difficult to measure decision making. That's one of the struggles that we have. We're able to see when somebody makes a change if they document it in our data system. But we're not obviously very good at getting into a practitioner's head to see, well, how did you make that decision? And was that informed by data? Was it informed by, you know, your past history with similar children or with other families or other information that you have about the family? So it's a really, really tricky area, measuring decision making in general. One area that is very adept at using data for decision making is the field of medicine. You know, you go into a doctor's office and they're checking your blood pressure, your heart rate. Depending on what you're there for, you're going to go through a lot of tests, and you'll go through tests at one hospital and another hospital, and they are very, it's gotten better, at least very well equipped at being able to kind of triangulate several pieces of data to help make decisions about your healthcare. And again, going back to those kind of a lack of measurement tools, that medicine is just much more equipped with a lot of different types of data to help drive, you know, what type of a treatment should be used, and helping nurses and doctors make decisions. In education, A2I, Carol Connor and her team is one example, I think, of a really strong application that where teachers can make individual decisions about children's early literacy gains, and it collects general outcome measures, frequent assessments on children's early literacy, and provides recommendations as to, you know, what type of a literacy intervention is needed for children that aren't making gains as expected. So, and by the way, if you guys have questions, don't hesitate to pipe in at any time. I'm not going to be looking at the chat, but if you do have a question, just say something, unmute yourself. That's fine. And there will be time for questions afterwards too. So the early communication indicator, some of you are probably familiar with this measure, and it is a general outcome measure. And the idea behind a general outcome measure is that it's designed, again, for that individual child decision making, monitoring growth over time. So it should be done more frequently than what you typically see with more comprehensive standardized measures that may be done once a year, twice a year. And since we're working with infants and toddlers, these are benchmarked for children that are 6 to 42 months of age. And since we're working with infants and toddlers, as you can see on the left there, this is a play-based assessment. We're not providing children items. We're not asking children questions. It is a play-based 6-minute assessment where we have a standardized toy set where a trained practitioner, preferably a parent, serves as a play partner with the child during the 6 minutes, and a trained certified assessor counts how often the child is exhibiting some type of a behavior. In the case of the ECI, we're measuring gestures, vocalizations, single words, and multiple words. So, and it's a raw frequency count. And what you end up with ultimately, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but is a total score that is entered into into a web application, and it plots that child's data against the normative benchmark. So you can see we've kind of modeled this visual display after height and weight charts that parents and practitioners are very familiar with. So you can easily see how a child is progressing. Number one, kind of a snapshot of where they are at a particular moment in time. So this child at looks like about 13 months was, right at around benchmark. This green line is benchmark. But you can see over 3 assessments, their rate started to decline. We obviously want to see growth in language at this age, and this child is declining. And at some point, at about 18 months, a decision was made to put an intervention in place, and you can see after some time that language growth improves. So this blue line here represents that child's slope. So it actually calculates slope if you have more than one data point. And you can see, again, when we're doing more frequent assessments, we're going to get some variability. This is a pretty clear example of an intervention that obviously had an impact on this child's language, but sometimes it's not quite so clear. If you have a lot of bounce, it's really nice to be able to see, what does the average trend look like? So it calculates a slope and again, is designed to help inform decision making. So let's take a quick look at the early communication indicator, the key skill normative trajectory. So basically, as I mentioned, we're looking at four types of expressive communication on the ECI. Number one, gestures. And so this line you're seeing here is basically the rate of growth, the normative rate of growth for gestures. It's basically flat. You have a little bit of a curve here up until 18 months, a little decrease. Gestures isn't doing a whole lot. What's more interesting is vocalizations, where you see a significant growth up until 18 months. And interestingly, you see a decline after 18 months. And the reason for that is because those vocalizations are turning into single words. And I'm not getting too much into the weeds on the scoring definitions, but basically gestures are physical movements that indicate some kind of a communication, a point, or handing a toy, a wave. Vocalizations are non-word utterances that a child might make. And then single words are just that, they're words. And so you would expect that as vocalizations decrease, you're going to get an increase in single words. And then again, you see this level off and decrease in single words, because those single words ideally are going to turn into multiple words. So you see this nice dynamic relationship between these key skill elements. And this is ideally what a practitioner would use when they see that a child is performing below benchmark on this total score. They could use the information from that child's key skill elements to identify what specific type of intervention or what strategies should be used to either improve their rate of single word use or their multiple word use, wherever they're performing below benchmark. And so again, this is all of that, the counts from the gestures, vocalization, single words, and multiple words are combined into the total weighted communication score. And we call it a weighted score because we actually give additional weight to the single words and the multiple words because of that decrease in vocalizations that you see. That allows us, to see growth in this total score. If we didn't give it that weight, you would start to see a taper off. And in addition to that, we want to give more weight to these more advanced levels of communication too. And I'm just going to quickly describe this. I'll talk a little bit more about our work with adapting the ECI to measure progress of children with autism. But just wanted to kind of show you this while we're talking about these key skill elements. This is a study that we recently published. So we have a lot of programs that are using the ECI. So we've got programs in about 23 states. At this point, we're up to about 110,000 assessments that have been entered into the data system. So these are infant-toddler programs around the country. We obviously have several here locally and in Kansas that are using the ECI. So what we were able to do is identify, we've got colleagues at the Med Center through the and Sean Swindler, I think I saw Sean on here. He helped us identify some children who have an ASD diagnosis. They're in the registry, and through one of our local programs also happen to have some ECI assessments. It's a small sample, 23 children, but what we were able to do is compare their trajectories on these key skill elements and see what it looked like. And it's probably no surprise to folks here that single word rates, all of these differences are significant. These linear growth trajectories, gestures, the slopes here are not significant, but the intercept at 42 months, that is significant. And then all these others are significant. So particularly interesting, and again, not too surprising, is the rate of growth on vocalizations. We applied a linear trajectory to these because it wouldn't fit, because we had a small sample. The 23 sample size was too small to apply a quadratic slope to this. So we looked at it linearly, and not too surprising, children with ASD do not tend to show that decrease in vocalizations. Their vocalizations continue to grow through 42 months. And multiple words, the slopes, significantly slower rate of growth on multiple words, and intercept significantly less, and same with single word rate. And that's going to be informative for what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. But you can see there's some interesting difference there.
Jay, real quick, can I interrupt? Just a real quick question on that last figure. I was just curious. In terms of those vocalizations, were you including like communicative vocalizations, or like how did you define that? Could these be like echolalic or stereotypic that are non-functional, or did you differentiate?
Yes. Yeah, excellent question. And they can be non-communicative. They can be echolalic and repeated vocalization. So exactly. And I think that's what you're seeing there. And interestingly, I was a little bit surprised with the single word rate, because it's the same with single words. We do see kids with autism, particularly at the younger ages, that that they have a word that they perseverate on. And we would hear that from our, particularly our early Head Start programs, a child will be performing fine on single words, but the home visitor would report to us, that's just one word. they're saying one word there, and they're saying it over and over again. So yeah, it is interesting, and we need a larger sample to really kind of tease that out. So one of our hypotheses with data-driven decision-making and progress monitoring is that the hypothesis is the more frequently you collect data on children, the the quicker, especially with infant toddler, the quicker you're going to identify children with a delay. You'll be able to get an intervention in place quicker, and the quicker you'll be able to make changes if those interventions are not making a difference. So going into the data system with that hypothesis, we were able to find 14 programs that have been using the ECI for at least 5 years, average of 9 years. You can see the numbers here of the number of children that were below benchmark in those programs and the number of ECI assessments that were done for those children. And we applied a two-piece multi-level growth curve model for each of these programs, each of these 14 programs. And this is what we found. And let me just take a second to describe this graph. So what you're seeing here are linear trajectories for each of these programs. And what we did is we kind of put them on a common scale, and that is the point with which they fell below benchmark. So these are no longer ages, these are number of months before a child eventually fell below benchmark. So you can see basically what this shows is, again, not too surprising, before a child falls below benchmark, they don't have a lot of growth. In fact, they're decreasing to some degree, but basically flat. So this red line is the mean level of growth before children fell below benchmark, and each of the individual lines represents a program. So before they fell below benchmark, they were at basically flat. After they fell below benchmark, and I love showing this data to programs, because what it suggests is they are making a difference. You know, these are early Head Start programs, Part C programs, some just community-based programs. They are making a difference, and we're seeing some really nice growth after a child falls below benchmark. So they're flat, and then after they fall below benchmark, you're seeing about a growth of about 1 communication per month after that. So what we were interested in this was seeing, was there a relationship between, like I said, the frequency of doing ECIs and kind of this difference between what was your growth before and what is it after? And we actually did find a pretty strong positive correlation between the frequency of doing the ECI and that rate of growth, that difference between growth before and after. So basically, the more frequently programs did the ECI, the better their outcomes were. Again, this is a correlation, it's just a relationship. There's other things that could certainly explain that other than doing more frequent observations. For example, if they're doing more frequent observations, they may have more resources. If they have more resources, they maybe have access to better interventions. We weren't looking at what type of interventions they were using. And they have more staff to be able to do those assessments. So, but it's an indicator. And so what we wanted to do is go beyond just, okay, do the assessment, enter your data, and here's your graph. Now decide what to do, take it from there. That's the challenge, right? Is, you know, a lot of times these are infant toddler home visitors, practitioners who maybe don't even have a bachelor's degree. And certainly oftentimes just lack the knowledge or even the resources to determine what needs to be done for a child, particularly at this age. So that's where the Making Online Decisions system comes in. And basically, this is an application that is developed in the data system. It's not a separate system. It's within the system where they're entering the data. And the idea is to, number one, quickly identify children that are falling below benchmark and make that really obvious. So the recommendation is to do quarterly ECI assessments. And as long as a child is performing at or above benchmark, nothing happens. They look at the graph, they can celebrate that, share the information with the parents, and typically that's the case. In our data, about anywhere between 15 and 20% fall below benchmark. All of the others are at or above benchmark. But if they are below benchmark, first question is, was it a valid assessment? I'll get to that in a second. If it's a valid assessment, a few questions are asked about, what do you think might be causing this problem? Why is this child falling below benchmark? They answer those questions, and then the real power of the mod comes in actually recommending strategies based on that child's performance on the ECI, taking a look at each of those key skill elements. And currently, what we have integrated in terms of strategies are Dale Walker and her colleagues, the promoting communication strategies, which are strategies that parents can use and particularly in home visiting settings to promote language, promote talk, encourage parents, gives them really specific ways that they can talk more to their child during diapering, during feeding time. There's videos on how to do it. And so it's recommending very specific strategies within the promoting communication strategies based on a child's, ECI score. The next thing is, once those strategies are recommended and the home visitor or practitioner actually selects strategies they think that the parent is most likely to use, the mod recommends more frequent assessment, because again, we want to be able to see beyond quarterly. So we recommend monthly. That's a challenge. That's something that we've not been able to, we haven't been real successful at encouraging programs to go beyond quarterly assessments. Some do, but the mod is recommending it. And importantly, it's also encouraging and providing checklists for home visitors and practitioners to monitor how much those strategies are actually being used. So you've got the strategies. Number one, have you actually presented the strategies to them? Have you modeled what was your strategy for teaching parents how to use those? And then continuing to follow up with parents on how much they're using them, any problems that they're having. And then after three more ECIs have been done, then the mod is able to make a determination based on the child's current level on the ECI. Is it above, below benchmark? Looking at their slope, is their slope above or below benchmark? And then it can predict 6 months later, based on the slope and their current level, where that child will be. Will they be, if they're currently still below benchmark, will they be at or above benchmark? And obviously there's going to be children that will never be at or above benchmark. But is their slope changing? And again, that's just a recommendation by the mod based on the data. And eventually, if they are not making gains, then a recommendation will be made to look for more intensive interventions. And at this point, we have not built in like a tiered level of intervention where if they're not making progress on what we consider to be more of a tier 1 level intervention, adding some more. In our current version of the mod, we can do that, but we have not done that yet. So that is a future direction. But here you can kind of see what these questions look like. This is just an actual screenshot of what questions look like. We try to make it as simple as possible and easy to get through. And then here, this screenshot, you can see this is the child's dashboard. Again, this is kind of where the system defaults to when you're looking at a child's progress. And again, we're trying to make it really easy to get to the strategies that are suggested for the child, the actual chosen strategies. And I'll show you that in just a second. But and also the current mod step mod history. You can change some settings here. But this is what the strategies look like. And again, these are algorithms that are applied to the ECI and identifying which strategies within the PC talk intervention should be used. So for this child, there was 5 strategies recommended, and the home visitor selected 3, again, based on their knowledge of the parent, what they think the parent would be ready to try. They can click a link here to actually see what that strategy is. What is this going to tell the parent to do? And is this something that's going to be useful for this parent? Once they've made that decision, then they can download that as a PDF. And if they're in the home at the time, they can go over it with the parent there or print it out and give it to them at pickup or drop off. And these recommendations will continue to adapt as more data are provided in the data system. So for a child that's below benchmark on single words, and maybe in 4, 5, 6 months, their single words are where they need to be, or they're starting to emerge, then the mod's going to start recommending strategies to promote multiple words. And so, this is where, there's time that passes, and more assessments are collected, more ECIs are done, and the fidelity checklists are completed so that the parent can, or the home visitor can follow up with the parent on how things are going and make sure that they're actually using the strategies. Okay, so let me talk quickly, not too quickly, about our randomized control trial that we did. So this was a goal 3 IES study that we completed. And so what we did here was EHS, that's Early Head Start. So these were Early Head Start programs that we recruited across these 4 states, you can see. And they're home visiting programs. So you can see each one of these blue circles, the dot in the center represents where that actual agency was. The circle actually represents the reach of that program, which is why it's important to show a map here. So you can kind of get a sense of what home visiting programs do. Because home visiting is just it's a completely different beast, and you can kind of think about home visiting in terms of a home being kind of like a classroom. So, a center-based program, you have children coming into a center, into a classroom, they're getting similar services, they have a similar environment. Here, not only are these home visitors, driving all over the state, in the case of Oakley here in Kansas, they're driving, 50, 60 mile round trips in some cases out in Western Kansas. So it's challenging, but it's also challenging because, especially now with staff turnover, it's training and professional development is very difficult. So the idea of having kind of a low-cost personal assistant like the mod is particularly important for these programs. So with the randomized control trial, these within each program, home visitors were either randomized to either use the mod or not use the mod. All of them used the ECI. All of them had access to the promoting communication strategies. The only difference between these home visitors was, again, some of them would get these mod recommendations and encouraged to follow up with parents, and others, they would see that a child fell below benchmark, but whether or not they actually provided the PC talk strategies or not, it was up to them. We gave them all the training. Both groups received training and were certified on the ECI and taught about the PC Talk strategies, but the mod home visitors had the mod. So 163 home visitors, 214 families, and these were all families who had a child that scored below benchmark on the ECI, 1 standard deviation below benchmark. So our outcome measures were the ECI, obviously, and the preschool language scale, 5th edition, and parents' use of the promoting communication strategies. And you can see the research questions I'm going to focus on here. We also did a mediation analysis to see how the promoting communication strategies mediated the effect of the mod. But I'm going to hone in on these the effect on ECI scores and PLS-5. So before I show you the graph, just want to show you on the right here, we really wanted to look at the effect of mod implementation on this, not just the mod as one big intervention, because you'll see, I'll tell you in a minute, that there's a lot of variation. We're not in these programs every day. They're using the mod kind of as is really naturally. We met with them once a year, and other than that, they use the mod as they did. And so we split our groups up into a few implementation levels. So that first level is home visitors who had children, and they went to this third stage of the mod, and that's where they got strategies. So the most basic level is child performed below benchmark. They answered the questions about why the child might be low, and then they got some strategies. So there's a group that got that far. There's another group that got the strategies, and they did at least one follow-up checklist. And then the full implementation group, that level 3 stage, is the group that basically they did all of the checklists, at least 3 checklists, and they did at least 3 more ECI follow-ups. So again, kind of thinking this is the same type of graph we were looking at before, and you can see kind of their base level of growth on the ECI across those 3 stages, and compared to that self-guided group, which is the black line. So again, fairly flat growth before they fell below benchmark. After they fell below benchmark, the self-guided group, again, really good news. Children's growth changed. It improved significantly. And that's, again, love showing these data to programs, because they are making a difference, whether we're involved or not. It's great to see. So those in the mod group, those first 2 levels, you can see a little bit of a change. Those are not significant differences. The level 1 group actually is a significant difference, but I think that's because, just by random chance, they were decreasing more at baseline. And so that slope is a little bit different. I wouldn't consider that a clinically significant difference. But with the level 3 group, we saw a very significant level of growth, and you can see the effect sizes, moderate effect sizes at 6 months post-intervention, and then at 12 months post-intervention, that effect size doubled. And so that really, to me, really indicates the power of that follow-up with parents, and providing those strategies, and then also being able to follow up with the ECI as well, so that they can make changes. And what we did see as well, and I'm not showing a slide on this right now, but that parents did use the PC Talk strategies more often, in the mod group, significantly more often in the mod group. And that proved to be a mediator in this, again, because the mod is recommending and prompting them to follow up with parents, reminding them to use those strategies. So we did blind assessments of their use of the strategies. These weren't the home visitors that were just reporting how much they were using. We actually had assessors go in and count how many of the strategies and how often they were using the strategies during daily routines.
Jay, can I interrupt
Yeah.
again? I apologize.
No.
Just interesting data.
Mm-hmm.
On that previous slide, and I also apologize if I missed this and you said it, the mod groups, were they assigned or did they self-select to carry out all of the
They were assigned. So yeah, we randomly assigned them to either use the mod or not. And within the system, we can either turn it on or off at the user level. And so yeah, they were
Very
randomly
nice.
selected.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And so with the PLS-5, very similar outcomes. And again, all of those ECI data, the limitation of those ECI data is that they were administered and scored by home visitors. And with the PLS-5, we had blind assessors doing assessments at 6 months post-intervention and then at 12 months intervention, post-intervention. And again, we saw differences on the totals, on raw scores and on standard scores for the total score and the auditory comprehension score. The only place we didn't, which was kind of interesting, was with the slope on the expressive communication. It approached significance on with the raw scores. Standard score is not even close. So yeah, that was interesting because honestly, I kind of would have expected the opposite, that since we're measuring expressive communication, but pretty much across the board, we found some really strong differences on the PLS. And so what does all this mean, and where are we going from here? The biggest concern for me is, again, this how do we get more people to that stage 3? And there are some legitimate reasons why home visitors aren't making it to stage 3. And just to give you some numbers on that, I just kind of wrote these down, is 20% of those children made it to stage 1, 41% made it to stage 2, 39% made it to stage 3. And so basically, we have 61% that aren't making it stage 3. Some of those are because children leave the program. If they leave the program, that makes sense. Either they age out. We did have a cutoff or a maximum age of 36 months, so they could have been in the program for another 6 months. But there, it's a somewhat transient population sometimes with early Head Start, so they do have a tendency to move. But there's still a proportion of home visitors that simply are not doing the checklists, are not doing the ECI at a strong enough frequency, and a lot of that has to do with staff shortages and just not having time to do, even though it's only a 6-minute assessment. It takes time to set it up, break it down, then you have to enter the data into the data system if you're not using the mobile app. So it is a staff issue in some ways. But what we are trying to do, again, we look at us and say, how can we improve this? And we currently have a IES Goal 2 proposal to really make this more usable for not just home visiting programs, but also center-based programs, to be able to use it across other measures. So I've really just been focusing on the ECI here, but we also have a problem solving measure, a measure of infant toddler movement, and social engagement. So being able to use the mod with those measures. Also critically important was being able to adapt this for use with other curriculum or intervention materials. So as I mentioned, this is exclusively right now with the randomized control trial was only used with the PC talk strategies, which are evidence-based strategies and wonderful strategies. But sometimes we have programs that say, well, you know, we're using the Frog Street curriculum, or we're using Creative, or something else, you know. And so could I get, you know, some guidance on how to use that with these with the IGD data? And so that's what we've done. We've developed that, and we're currently doing feasibility testing with programs in the local area, using other curricula. And some of the challenges with that are actually kind of doing that crosswalk and alignment between the curricula and the specific IGD measures. So also having email reminders to do the to do follow-up checklists. Nobody likes getting email reminders. We're trying to, you know, walk a balance between, you know, turning into just white noise and actually having meaningful reminders, because it, you know, with the old system, the only time you actually engaged with the mod was when you actually went into the data system. And if you don't go into the data system, you're not going to see that. So sending reminders, we're hoping is gonna again help people go into that stage 3. The other thing that we're doing is we're adapting the ECI for children who have an ASD diagnosis. So kind of broadly, one of the things that we're doing is that we're in addition to the 4 key skill elements that I've mentioned, we're developing scoring and administration to measure initiated joint attention. So being able to add probes into the ECI. So right now there's very little prescriptive information on how to serve as the play partner, other than, you know, be engaged with the child, don't ask too many questions, follow the child's lead. And with this, we're adding some probes to be able to try to encourage initiated joint attention. So for example, you have the standard toy sets, the barn or the house for the ECI, and adding a novel stimulus at some point during that play session to try to encourage the child to initiate joint attention with the play partner. So right now we're playing with the scoring definitions and the administration procedures, and doing some feasibility testing with some families locally to, number one, make sure that it is feasible to administer, and that it can be scored reliably with limited training. Or with brief training. So we really want to keep this at the practitioner level. We don't want this measure to be something that, you know, is exclusive to BCBAs or people with a high level of experience with assessments. And then in a few months, we'll be doing a validity study to see how the scores on this new measure align with some of the other commonly used measures for children with ASD, do some test retest reliability, and importantly, make sure that it's sensitive to growth over time. So that's my main presentation. What questions do you guys have?
Thanks, Jay. That was a wonderful talk. A lot of data, really exciting data too.
Yeah,
it's encouraging to see you point out.
Thanks.
yeah. So I have some questions, but let's open up to the audience.
Yeah.
Thoughts or feedback or questions that people have. So if nobody else is going to jump in, then I don't feel bad about jumping in. So one of the things that I was both struck by and then also just really interested in is that you see these really impressive slopes, so that like I never see in my data, right? Like you have like R's of like 0.75, and that would be fantastic. We all love that. But what's really like compelling about that in some ways also is that you are showing that it's just the prompting that you need to do something or you need to do more, but you're not necessarily prompting, if I'm understanding correctly, or specifically guiding what to do. If I understand correctly.
Well, the strategies are pretty prescriptive. So like those promoting communication strategies are now the follow-up with the parents, it is fairly general about. So I could show you some of what those checklists look like, but it's really it's asking the home visitor to gauge and ask the parent, how much are you actually using these strategies? You know, can you show me how you're using them? So there is some specifics around definitely the types of strategies they're using, but the follow-up is a little bit more general. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, well, I guess where I was kind of going with it, I'm trying to understand like how much variability you're seeing in the response and the changes in trajectories following these prompts and following this guidance. And then I guess related to that is how you're thinking about it, or maybe how you're measuring, you know, what are the mechanisms that are allowing the intervention to work or allowing it to be efficacious versus for those kids that maybe respond less. Is that a breakdown in the intervention and in the fidelity of the intervention, or is it there's something about the child characteristics that are causing it to break down?
Yeah, and it would be interesting to see if there are child characteristics. We haven't looked at the level of, you know, specific diagnoses, if certain children are responding, having stronger responses than others. At this point, it really is kind of, as you said, it's that prompting, because I think there's so little of that's happening in particularly these home visiting programs where there's, you know, we're not really talking about people with really strong intervention backgrounds or any intervention background. You know, that they're often, they have a 2-hour, once a week, maybe once every 2-week home visit with parents, and a lot of times that's really focused on, you know, how are parents doing? Are you able to provide food for your child? Some really basic, important, you know, resources. But what they're usually lacking is some guidance on, you know, language, cognition, which what they typically see as less important, and a lot of times it is less important, and that's why, you know, just some basic reminders of these, and again, we're talking about really, you know, tier 1 strategies here. So are you talking to your child? We're not talking about some advanced interventions, and again, I think that's important. And another thing that we should probably look more at is, you know, for those children that aren't making gains, you know, are there different interventions that are putting in place? Are they recommending an SLP or getting Part C involved? Because again, it's kind of making sure that tier 1 level is in place.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, it makes it even more compelling, I guess, that this doesn't have to be implemented by someone with 6 years of training in behavioral therapy or language development, and
Exactly.
So it's really scalable, and so it's exciting from that perspective. It's cool stuff.
It is, and I sometimes I'm a little disheartened that, you know, more folks aren't you know, jumping on it, because it's really just embedded within the ECI, and I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the type of data we're getting. It's, you know, quarterly observations is great. That is a high level of assessment that we're getting a lot of times. Some of our programs do twice a year, you know, once a year. And obviously they're not using that for decision making. They're using that to report to a state on, you know, how they're, which is fine. That's important too. But in order to really inform intervention, we need to do more frequent assessment and get more data from different assessments.
Yeah, makes sense.
And different measures too. So,
I was going to say, it seems like you have some of that built in too, right? Like you're measuring other aspects of development that could relate to expressive language or broadly language out.
And I think you know, an area that we're really, you know, with Dwight Irvin's work, we're really trying to get to a point where, you know, that we don't even have to do a 6-minute assessment. Let's collect some Lena data. Let's you know, collect some movement data, some automatic data that they don't even have to collect that could inform intervention. And so we are kind of looking at ways that we can apply kind of a mod type of system to those types of measures too, that are very low cost. Well, in terms of effort, maybe not in terms of money, but
yeah, not adding a lot of burden at least to it.
Right.
So that makes sense. So I see that we're right at the hour at 5 o'clock. If nobody has any pressing questions, I'm going to let Jay get on with his evening. But Jay, I definitely wanted to thank you again for doing this. It's wonderful to see this data. I think I've heard a bit about it from conversations with you. I've read some of your work, but really nice to hear about it in person. So we appreciate you joining us and providing a wonderful talk. So thank you for that.
Happy to do it.
Yeah.
Good to see y'all. And yeah, email me or let me know if you got any other questions or if you want a copy of the presentation.
Sounds great. Thanks again, Jay. Thanks everyone for joining. Take care.
Take care. Thanks.